First, Congressman, thanks for coming out on this Saturday to listen to us. I'd like to go to the three, I think, main points. I think I saw one in your communication, which is how to grow the economy, how to solve the deficit, and how to create jobs. And since I only got 2 minutes, I think the one that's really central to that ties in the other two, is how do we solve the deficit. First of all, I think the super committee, I think what they're doing is absolutely useless. I hate to say that. I disagree with you in that it sounded like the latter part as you were explaining what happened. They do absolutely nothing and the automatic things kick in. That would be the best thing that could happen in this country. Okay? And I'm going to tell you why. I went back and I looked at revenue and I looked at expenditures for the federal government since 1965, and I graphed them. And if you project it out and smooth out the lines, okay, you'll see that we've had a structural deficit, which is why we have a $15 trillion deficit today. But of course, most of that in the last 10 years. So where the President and the Congress, I don't care what party you're in, President and the Congress became really irresponsible was back in 2000, okay? Because you'll see all of a sudden, spending goes, the graph just jets up like that, and revenue actually goes kind of wacky, as you might imagine. But the bottom line here is, we're arguing about, is it a spending problem or is it a revenue problem? And that analysis clearly shows you it's a spending problem. Revenue, if you do that, smooth out that line, is about exactly where it ought to be in a historical projection. About $2.2 trillion. Okay? Spending should probably be about 2.5, which would still leave you with a $300 billion deficit, okay? But it's not. It's up around 3.6 or 3.7. So you should be at 3.5. Excuse me, around 2.5 on expenditures, and you're at 3.7. You're 50% over budget. No, you're 50% over where you ought to be. You're about 70% above your revenues, okay? Because your revenues should be a little bit higher than it is right now. Okay, revenues are definitely down off of that curve. So, what you really need to do, if you think $1.2 trillion over 10 years is going to help, you don't get it. You in Congress don't get it.
Exactly.
You need $1 trillion a year. You're running a 1.3, 1.5, somewhere in that range, depending on whose lie you believe, 1.3 to 1.5 trillion dollar deficit. So you got to take $1 trillion out next year, okay? And that'll still leave you at $300 to $400 billion deficit. You can't raise revenue. You just heard the people. They don't have it anymore. And guess what? Revenue is about where it ought to be when you look at the steady growth since 1965. So you better go back to your Democratic friends and your Republican friends, okay? And clear it up for them. It is a spending problem. 100%. Not 95, 100%. Now, if you're going to keep running the government like this, which if you do your $1.2 trillion in 10 years, what you're telling us is you're going to keep running the government the same way for the next 10 years. That's what you're telling us. $100 billion won't help. And the government that efficient is going to be a drag on our overall economy. And as we all know, it's been a global economy for 20 years. And if you want to keep your standing of living, keep going down, and keep doing what you're doing, say Yahoo, when they cut $1.2 trillion, the deficit's going up next year by $400,000 if you don't increase your spending at all. Why? That's the interest on your debt. $400 billion. Okay? That's if you stop spending on everything, no increase on anything else. That's how serious it is. You guys don't seem to get it. And it's why, over time, you've got, what, 35% people now who are in unaffiliated parties because both parties have lost touch with the people.
You said a lot there.
It's real simple.
Well, I'll tell you what. There's one thing that I disagree with, and that I know I'm right on, which is it ain't real simple. I promise you that. I agree with a lot of what you just said. Look, if you look at you picked the year exactly right. The year 2000, the previous year from that, we ran a surplus in the government. Now, that isn't good enough because it doesn't address the long-term issues in Social Security and Medicare. But it's something that we have not done in a very, very long time. I totally disagree. First of all, it ain't simple. I'll come back to that. Two.
You sound like the town government. It is simple.
The problem.
I'm going to tell you how.
No.
No, because he's going to spend cut $1.2 trillion is a waste of our money. What you need to do, go back to the 2000 budget, okay?
Sir, I'd like to give other people a chance to speak here, so I'm going to be very brief in answering this. There's not a lot of dispute over what the deficit reduction number is. It's $4 trillion over 10 years. That's not Democrats or Republicans. This is the economics profession. There's not much dispute on that. So 1.2 trillion, I was very clear with this up front, gets you, I can't do the math in my head, but it gets you about 30% of the way there, in addition to the 1 trillion we've already done. Now, you said historical trends on revenue. Right now, we are collecting at the federal government less tax revenue than we have since 1958, okay? About 16%. European countries collect 25, 26%. How much tax revenue we collect is a function, and anybody who works in the municipal government knows that, of what we want to pay for. Now, you said 2.5 trillion is your number. 2.5 trillion right now is, I talked about half that pie, Medicare and Social Security, interest on our debt, which we got to pay. It's that plus about half our Pentagon budget. That gets you to about 2.5 trillion. So to get to 2.5 trillion, if you don't want to make very substantial cuts to Medicare, Social Security, and Defense, which are all very, very problematic, we could eliminate investments in our highways, our court system, the FAA, which keeps our planes safe, and all of the other stuff the government does. So the amount we tax ourselves has to be a function of what we want. And the reality is that we, right up front, we want Social Security. Something like 80% of Americans think Social Security is a great thing. By the way, the Republicans are raising hell at the prospect of any further cut, $1 more cut from the Pentagon's budget. So you and I could talk, and we'd probably disagree about whether the right number is 18% of GDP or 22% of GDP, but this is not simple. This is very complicated.
Cut it off.
Cut it off?
Yeah.